Okay, well, this is day one of shooting the film. It's more than a little terrifying to actually go back. There's something that happens when a director looks at a film, even in its final form, where it takes him years to actually get over what had happened on the day, and now I'm actually being forced to remember it. But this is in a place called Engyoji. It's a 900-year-old monastery that we had to reach by taking a funicular. It's above a small town called Himeji in Japan, and we all felt that it was somehow the most fitting and respectful place to begin shooting the film, because it has the heart of old Japan in every space, in every piece of wood, grooved into the paths that you see Tom and the character playing Bob walking.
Right there. He stands right there. Perfect.
We're inside the temple now, and it's this extraordinary space where the light coming from outside reflects on the wood itself, and John is using the natural light to actually light the scene. He's cutting it with a particular way from outside that you can't see from the shot. But it's a very, very beautiful space, and we felt that we needed that space to sort of infuse the film. We wanted to have something real to begin before we began actually to use artifice and building to imitate something. It was as if all of us, having been in the real space, could then understand the feeling of it and try to recreate that. Once he's landed, you're inside, and then I come to this place of my ancestors, and it's almost as if we're feeling the place around us. It's not a move.
You want to see the world.
See him see it. As he's looking, feel the world starting to spin around him a little bit. Okay? This is actually one of the rare moments in the film in which I allow the camera to become more subjective. The camera is essentially invisible, and I tried to have the camera be actually as humble as it could, to be away from the story and let the story tell itself. But this moment I felt, as Ken actually talks about something in the past in this beautiful place, I felt that the camera could almost be inside his head and doing it in the moment that he talks about the cherry blossoms. Parenthetically, those cherry blossoms were not real because, of course, we weren't shooting in the spring, so we experimented. I had to imagine weeks and weeks and weeks as to come up with different fabrics, different materials. There were the cherry blossoms that needed to blow. There were the cherry blossoms that needed to be seen close up. There were the cherry blossoms we had to mass produce. But the space that we're in is a real graveyard, and you can see the shrines actually all around it, and it's a very, very strong and powerful place. I was thinking, John, to try to get that tree maybe? We shot all around this monastery. We had already designed the opportunity to include it in many different parts of the story because we could only be there for a few days, and indeed it would appear several times throughout the film. So it's as if we would take little pieces of the real place that we would then cut into the place that we would build, and we would sort of kludge them together so as to make it invisible. Every time that I see myself talking to Tom, I'm reminded of his suppleness in moments like this, that we would prepare and prepare and prepare, we'd rehearse, and then we'd get there in the day and it would all be different. And what was extraordinary to me was his willingness to just sort of sit and let it sink in and then just flow with it. He was remarkably supple in that way. Leave these guys where they are, okay? The two guys who are on the outside. We've now moved to Kyoto. We're in the second week of filming. We're in an extraordinary temple called Chionin, and we felt that there were some spaces that we could never even begin to reproduce, and this is one of them. We were trying to recreate the feeling of the Imperial Palace, and I'm sure you'll see in a moment the steps that they're walking up. They were majestic, and we wanted to just have that sense of something portentous about to come as they approach the Imperial Palace. And there were so many places like this in Kyoto itself. Kyoto is the real center of not just of learning tradition in Japan, but it was the one place that wasn't firebombed. Cordell Hull and Sumner Wells in the Roosevelt administration had been Japan hands and had taken a great love of Kyoto in their youth, and they implored Roosevelt in the bombing of Japan to spare Kyoto, and they did.
Two women can just go to the side a little bit that way.
The two in the back?
Yes.
We're now in another temple in Kyoto, trying to create a space as part of the Emperor's Palace. The man talking with me is a man named Ed Licht. He's part of the Directors Guild, but he also spent many years in Japan and is a self-proclaimed Kyogen expert as well. Some of the women who are wearing those gorgeous robes, one of them on the right, her name is Yoko Narahashi, and she was a woman who I first met when I began casting the film. She runs a theater company in Japan. She was trained, she's not just bilingual, she's really bicultural, and I think she'd spent a couple of years actually at Strasbourg. And really she became a kind of Beatrice for me for the film. She made it safe for the acting community to begin to trust me, and not only translated for me as the film went on, but translated my deepest intentions. She was hugely important to the film. Parenthetically, these costumes that they're wearing were costumes that had originally been based on the original costumes that the Emperor's family had worn in this moment, because a man named Sengoku-san took Nyla Dixon and I into his workshop and showed us the real fabrics and the real designs for what they would have worn in those days. The man playing the Emperor is a son of a very famous kabuki actor. His name is Chichinosuke Nakamura, and his father runs one of the biggest kabuki theaters in Tokyo. He himself is a very talented kabuki actor. What Ken Watanabe does here, as he kneels before the Emperor, becomes very important later in the film, and it was a bit of behavior that Ken understood and actually had shown me. I then took advantage of it much later in the film when the character of Algren then speaks to the Emperor on Katsumoto's behalf. It's as if he's imitating the same gesture.
If you would, you might bow and then pass them and let them go by. If the rickshaw has to stop for a moment because someone else is blocking it.
We're into about the third or fourth week of filming. We've come back to the United States now. We're in the Burbank studios, which one could say is as foreign a country perhaps as Himeji, Japan. But we are on a street that has served as so many other streets in movies gone by, and suddenly for us it's become Tokyo in 1876. It's a really remarkable set that Lily Kilvert has designed based on photographs of the period, this having been the moment that the camera was first introduced to Japan. People went camera crazy, as they remain to this day. So we had photographs as the basis of the research for everything that we were doing, the signage, the telegraph wires, the costumes, all of it. Suddenly we've jumped now to the fourth week of filming, or fifth. We're in shooting a week of nights. This too is built in Burbank. This lagoon where Katsumoto's Tokyo house is set, on which we've created this really lovely Japanese traditional home. It's a crucial moment. It was a difficult thing to shoot. It was the first action sequence of a film, and whenever you're shooting action and you haven't actually done it in a while, it's as if you're learning to do it all over again. And we discovered as we were filming that there were suddenly noise restrictions because of the neighborhood in Burbank, and we had to change our whole shooting pattern. It was very trying because you never really know what the action's going to look like and what your technique's going to be.
Yeah, so, all right. Yeah, now everyone.
We're back on the street now, shooting a very crucial moment. This is the moment when they cut off Nobutada's top knot. You see Yoko Narahashi behind me. You see these really extraordinary actors. It was very important for us to find Japanese actors in America whose accent was traditional and not Nisei, and meaning second generation Japanese here, because we wanted the film to sound authentic to the Japanese audience as well.
Tim, and then he comes and looks and sees what's going on.
We're back here on the Burbank street. I'm looking at the signage up there. Every one of those signs is based on, a real sign of the period. The man kneeling beneath the camera is David James, who was the unit photographer who did an extraordinary book of photographs, during the filming. And that's Tim Spall, who became quite a resource to me in some of the period behaviors of the time. He's one of these very accomplished English actors who knows so much about the actual, period, what is period, appropriate to period. I also thought the character that Tim plays is really based on a very famous photographer of the day who recorded many of these sights and sounds and places that I then used for the film. So his character is constantly taking pictures of geisha, of street scenes, and then ultimately the samurai themselves. Each of these little vignettes begins with a conversation between John Toll and me, and there must have been, maybe 50,000 of these conversations before, during, and at night watching the dailies. And it was a very, very dynamic relationship because he's an opinionated man. He's a very determined, even ferocious artist. And it was a very interesting process where we each had to almost rhetorically convince each other of our points of view and test what we believed for each shot. And, I think what John's work ends up, movie just, speaks for itself. But the relationship of determining the shots was really at the heart of the process. I've put a camera in a truck, in a crane, on a roller coaster, and on any number of places. I'd never really put one in a rickshaw before. And the Steadicam in this shot is actually in another rickshaw at a certain moment. And I just thought that was one of those great incongruities of making an old-fashioned period movie where you'd see extras in period clothing suddenly talking on the cell phone to their agent and a Steadicam riding in a rickshaw. This is on a four-wheeled vehicle here in which it's, I don't even know what the vehicle would have to be called. It's like a little motorized Chapman dolly or something. I'm sure that John and the Grip actually devised it just for the shot itself. Well, this is the fight that we shot over 3 nights with Tom. It's the first thing we really talked about in terms of stunts for the movie and became the focus of his training. He ultimately had to do 36 moves consecutively, almost as if it were a kind of small dance performance, and each one had to be exact because there were people swinging aluminum swords at him and he was swinging one at them. We were very determined not to have the old traditional kind of choreography where someone's waiting to be killed. We wanted all of them going full speed all the time. It was just remarkable work, and he's proud of it. And we're happy about it. Well, suddenly we've jumped to New Zealand now, and it's after the new year. We're in the village. That's Nick Powell, to whom I'm speaking. Nick is the stunt coordinator who has choreographed all these fights with me and with the actors. The man with him, that's Hiroyuki Sanada, who plays Ujio, who is unto himself one of the great martial artists in Japan, and was to Nick and to me this remarkable resource, because he not only had such a brilliant control, but he has such experience in the genre and has done so much and had so much to help us with. And I felt sometimes that not only was I directing him, but I was also a student to him in this movie. We're talking here about something that becomes very important. Obviously, the sign of respect is central to the culture, but also becomes central to the narrative of the story, because it ends with the Imperial Army showing their respect and then Algren going to the Emperor. And so trying to understand the nuances of who bows to who and when and what is appropriate and how does each various little shading reveal all sorts of nuance was very important for me to try to get right and to enlist those who knew it much better than I. And the idea of kata and repetition, which is what they're doing here now, is of course central to any kind of martial art. And the idea that Algren would find his way, recovering from his wounds, and finding his way toward the spiritual through the physical, is at the heart of the second act of the movie, in these repetitions, in these kata. The stillness that he gets to is a legacy of his understanding the training. We're here now, preparing to shoot the scene in the rain where Ujio beats up Algren. It begins with these 2 lovely little boys. The boy playing Higen played the character of Simba in The Lion King, which is where I first saw him in the Tokyo production. And it's a very difficult thing because that mud became a kind of gumbo. And here, not just these boys, but then later Tom and Sonata were swinging these kendo sticks at each other's heads at great strength and speed. And there was real risk. But we sort of thought that the rain would give this lovely quality to the whole ambience of the scene, give it a kind of imminent feel. We're now into the second action sequence of the film. That was the attack by the assassins, by the ninja. And this is a sequence that I believe we devoted an entire week to, if not more. And each of these bits had to be choreographed for weeks before. And then the challenge of actually how to photograph this and how to break it down, in my mind, to give it some coherence and some narrative understanding so that it's not just chaotic, was a significant challenge, particularly as you go into nights and you're working all night long and trying to keep your focus at the same time that you're trying to, keep your health and keep your strength. But I knew that each fight in the movie had to be different from every other fight. They each had to be of a different nature and even of a different almost nomenclature. I think that the idea of this attack and the defense of the village is much different in sense than the final battle is entirely different than Algren taking on the Ronin. I think it all had finally to do again with narrative, the investment in the characters as much as the actual stunts themselves. And the ability to actually follow what was happening with clarity was certainly the thing that one looks to someone like Kurosawa to learn from, because that was his extraordinary gift. We're now inside during part of that same stunt because he did his own stunts. There's nobody standing in for him. This is another moment in the same sequence when the young boy pulls his father's sword to take on the ninja, and here you've got actually, 12-year-old boy doing his own stunts as well. So he had to train just like everybody else. This is the kind of sequence that has to be broken up into 1,000 pieces, and when you're doing it, you fear that there's going to be no continuity and no flow, and somehow have to keep in your mind the feel of the whole, which is often why you have worked together on the choreography and understand you're picking up something in the middle and trying to understand what's happening in 3 different places at once. You can hear on the track here the cicadas. They were so loud we had to loop every single thing we did in this set. It's the parade ground. Fortunately, there were not that much dialogue, but it was enormously difficult to have this number of extras in this place. It's actually a cricket pitch that we turned into the parade ground in Tokyo. And we were actually in the town of New Plymouth here. This is a man named Togo Igawa, who is a very talented Japanese actor who also has worked in London with the National Theatre, and he's playing Hasegawa. And there's the parade ground with no one in it. When you see the actual film itself, you'll see thousands there. We did this as a comp shot where we shot on a different day, all the extras out there, and then we kludged those 2 elements together. Here we are now on the parade ground itself, later when Algren is training the troops. Each set of uniforms were different, the old Imperial Army and the new Imperial Army. It obliged us to literally have to give 2 separate looks to these extras. It was a remarkable accomplishment on Nyla's part to be able to, keep them straight, and the ADs as well, to be able to dress a certain number and change them even in the middle of a day for different sequences, because they took place in different times of the movie, yet we only had a certain number of days on this set to do it, so we'd have to actually go back and forth in time.
After you have fired this group.
That's Yoko translating for me. The issue of translation is so interesting because it puts this lag into the set of conversations, which you think is an obstacle and an annoyance, but there's also some godsend in it. It actually allows you sometimes to compose yourself and say less than you might not ordinarily say as the translation's taking place around you. The actual manual of arms and training was accomplished for us by a technical advisor man named Jim Deaver and his associate Dan King, who really went to school so as to get all of the tactics and all of the commands correct in Japanese. Dan is fluent as well, and they took it upon themselves to train these 400 or 500 men. And now we've jumped toward the end of the shooting. We're in the final battlefield. We're in this hidden trench as they await the final attack. It was terribly difficult to control this blinding sun and yet try to give it a feel of balance and imminence for the whole battle, because we're shooting this scene over 31 shooting days with every vagary and variety of weather you could possibly imagine. And we didn't want the snappy blue, so often we would stage something and then literally wait for the light to be correct for a cloud, and then race to get the film in cloud to have it give it some kind of shape, some kind of feel, rather than direct sun. I love the moments when you see this huge group of people sitting around as if they're picnicking, as other people are in the middle of this deep and intense performance. It always it's a very difficult thing when later you see any film not to think about where the craft service table is. It's a hard thing to talk to a group of people through a PA system or a megaphone and not feel like D.W. Griffith. And what was remarkable was how these guys had come, how they had devoted themselves to take 3 or 4 or 5 or even 6 weeks out of their lives in order to give themselves to this film. Some of them were students, some were martial artists, some were just guys who thought it'd be a lark. And what they did was so extraordinary with their commitment to being there in the sun, wearing this horrible armor, doing it, day after day, and taking themselves at risk. And look at this, here they go, and how could one even talk about what they're trying to accomplish here? It's not the kind of shot that one ever wants to do too many times, because the possibility of error, of risk, of people hurting themselves is enormous. But we were insistent that this happen not with CG, but with real people. We felt there was something ineffable that we needed to have that otherwise would be lost. And once you add horses into the mix among men, you clearly are in a even more precarious situation. The horses were so remarkable in terms of their training, though, and their ability, their willingness to work around gunfire and smoke, explosions. You can see now, suddenly we're on the same battlefield, and you've got people wearing scarves and mufflers, it's cold, and we're supposed to shoot the same sequence as if it's absolutely in continuity. That's Jim Deaver, to whom I'm speaking, all dressed up so he could be out there with the men as if he's a Prussian officer who advised the Imperial Army. And here they are just getting into position now. Ironically, these kind of scenes are created as much in the setup as they are in the actual execution, to try to understand the geography and create the tension that sort of allows the audience to invest in the movie, invest in the scene itself. Most of the sequence had to be shot one side and then the other. One day people would be dressed as samurai, the next day they'd be dressed as Imperial Army soldiers. And so we had to keep in mind, having to have both sides of every single moment, and yet we couldn't film them both at the same time. You'll see, I'm directing 1,000 people and yet one person at a time, trying to talk about how, an arrow hit might be taken, how to stage something for multiple cameras where there's an interesting bit of action in the foreground of every shot. I could allow the background action to fall off a bit, but I often had to devise all sorts of systems about giving people numbers so they wouldn't all fall at the same time, so they wouldn't all die at the same rate, so they wouldn't all suddenly be on the ground, no one left standing. To try to give that feeling of randomness, we had to create these sort of arbitrary and often ingenious systems to actually suggest the chaos. So indeed, it wasn't a uniformity of behavior, but it actually felt like something might really be happening. And each bit is accomplished only 3 or 4 seconds at a time. We went out to the battlefield every Saturday and every Sunday for the 12 weeks we were shooting before we got to it. The preparation, first with 6 people, then with 12, then with 20, shot for shot, was the most grueling and arduous we'd ever done. We felt we had to maximize every moment out there and try to understand how we could actually logistically plan to accomplish something like this. Most battles that I'd seen before are just a group lining up and charging. It doesn't involve strategy, it doesn't involve narrative, and we wanted this to be a complete scene with a beginning, a middle, and an end, where you knew where the principles were, when you knew what the strategy was, and you actually participated in it. But that obliged it to be much more detailed and took a lot more time to do.
Aim up there.
This is a lovely Japanese actor. His name is Koji Fuji. He's really a Yabusame horseman, which says he can ride and shoot at the same time, and he's a very good actor himself, who was playing one of the the cadre of the samurai ensemble, and he has the most beautiful face when he does what he does. I love look at the man standing behind with a flaming arrow there, and yet all you're looking at is his face. His poise is very beautiful here.
And don't forget to look up where the arrows might be coming from.
Now, what you're going to see here are people already with arrows stuck in them or acting as if they were being shot. This is in anticipation of the various CG arrows that we're going to paint in or paint out. If an arrow is already on someone, we're going to actually paint it out before it hits them. If it's not in them, we're going to paint it in. And again, we had to try to accomplish the feeling of randomness. Many of these guys aren't stuntmen, and so they had to be, helped to do too little, or in the case of not doing enough, they had to do more than they were doing. And I think a scene like this is actually no better than the worst person in it. It's remarkable how your eye goes right to the person who's not doing something well. And often in the editing, that's what you're editing about. You're literally taking out those moments where people ruin something that otherwise would have been great. It's not their fault that, they're not professional, but, you have to be mindful of it and, be prepared to cut around it.